everyone for being here today. This is a community engagement in climate action research webinar. And today we are discussing Memoranda of Understanding. My name is Sen Poole. I'm a program officer in the Research Grants Program Office in the within the UC Office of the President, the Research and Innovation Department. Next slide, please. This webinar today is the second of 12 monthly workshops and webinars that are hosted by the Community Engagement Shiro Supplement awardees. So these awardees, the supplements were provided to 10 projects due to the strength of their community engagement in their proposal. The PIs and their partners serve on an advisory team to identify best practices for engaging communities around climate risks and to provide leadership and resources and counsel to all climate award teams on community engagement. So as you see on this slide, we have a March general sense of what we will be presenting around the history of communities doing their own research and what it means to join these processes. You'll also see that the advisory team has generated potential additional topics for future webinars and they are noted on this slide. So please email our team member, Maggie Kulik, with additional ideas for webinars. Next slide, please. And via email, we will share what we learned in the January 19th breakout sessions and in feedback from participants. Today's session is about tools for documenting and updating partnership agreements. And we're going to be using the Memoranda of Understanding as an example of a tool. Next slide, please. Oh, sorry, back one slide. In breakout sessions and in discussions with each other, we're going to be able to identify best practices around the MOU. And these best practices are going to be pulled from the discussion, from notes, and from the report out. And our plan is to convert these resources, into resources that can be added to our community engagement webpage. Next slide, please. And this figure shows an increasing level of engagement with community. This is something that you saw in the January 19th webinar. Documented agreements can be useful at any state of engagement, as the document does record the commitments and what the individual members will do. Next slide, please. And the Memoranda of Understanding supports the collaboration in multiple ways. So building a set of agreements, of course, requires conversation and clarity and compromise. It also requires common understandings of what will take place and who will do specific activities. An MOU reflects values of all the people involved in the collaboration and partnership. And in the best cases, it serves as a living document that can be refined as the collaboration and the partnership matures and changes over time. The MOU provides guidance for multiple situations and helps to support team member memory. By having the MOU and agreements documented for a first project together, it can be used as a template for future projects, and in that way, it can help to sustain the collaboration. Next slide, please. In terms of practices for creating your memorandum of understanding and building it out, some of the key pieces are that it requires, of course, input from each partner. It requires several conversations, and it's helpful to utilize preferred communication methods. And a little more detail on each. So with the input from each partner, you will be gathering the vision for the partnership. These conversations also help you to discuss how you want to do business, what your needs are around communication, what are the priorities and needs for each organization, what are the norms for each organization around meetings and scheduling, What types of activities does each partner and organization have the capacity for? And of course, this is not an exhaustive list. You're going to find that there are other pieces of other content and topics of conversation that are important for your partnership as you build your agreements with each other. The team is usually going to need several conversations for scoping out your agreements, and teams tend to do well when they utilize the communication methods that work for all partners. Some folks might prefer to discuss out loud and get clarity as they hear themselves and others speaking. Some folks might prefer to think to themselves and write out their thoughts and share them once they've had a chance to really refine their thoughts. And so in that sense, a combination of spoken conversations and written conversations can help. Next slide, please. There are several elements of an agreement, and of course, this is not an exhaustive list. There are 2 slides that have the elements written down, but I would like to take you through some of these elements, and you will find over time that your partnerships, and you've probably already found this, that there are very specific things that you all have had to document in your memoranda of understanding. So of course, names, dates that are covered in the MOU, and those are often noted as the dates of the grant. Guiding principles for the partnership. This connects back to the conversation on vision for the partnership on the earlier slide. It's important to include things like your specific aims and your project objectives that you've documented in your grant application, and then responsibilities listed out per collaborator or partner. That can help a lot with institutional memory. Things get so busy that folks may forget exactly who was going to do what. Ownership of data is a really big piece of written agreements, and in this section, documenting what you have decided, how did you reach that decision, and how does that decision support capacity building for both community and academic partners on the project. You may hit on additional specifics such as what to do with identified versus de-identified data, where the data will be stored, and arrangements to ensure that both partners have access to the data even after the study, the funded period ends. And take a similar thoughtful approach to noting where you will appropriately share what you found in your project. What guides your team in deciding what to share? Which community-based outlets will you prioritize? And if you write reports on the project, who will be an author? What will be the order of authorship? Next slide, please. Recipients of the grant and financial agreements, this MOU should document who is going to receive the grant. Will it be only one partner? Is that the way that it's set up by the funder? Could it be 2 or more partners receiving the grant? And in best practices, when it is a community academic partnership, both partners having a grant is really ideal. Why did you decide on these specific financial agreements? And speaking to how it builds capacity and trust across the partnership. As you saw in the January webinar, one funder's perspective is that if both agencies have capacity to administer a grant, then it's recommended that you both get separate grant awards. Another piece in an MOU can be schedule for review and amendments. So it is a living document. In the best situations, it's something that you can come back to and refine as your partnership is growing and changing over the years. Some folks recommend a yearly check-in on the document of agreements. We found that it's helpful as well for partnerships to document how they will handle disagreements. And this does not mean differences of opinion, but it's more a plan for what happens if you exceed your own capacity to work through an issue. So handling disagreements, adding in documentation of a third party that you can turn to. Would it be an advisory group? Would it be trusted community or scientific colleagues working together. It does seem like it will never happen that you could exceed your capacity to work through an issue, but sometimes it does, and it's very normal and human for that to happen. Another piece is the termination of the MOU. So under what conditions will the team terminate this agreement? And then, of course, there's things like signatures. And an item I wanted to note, too, is additional verification from the community partner, such as including in your appendix of your grant application a statement by the governing body of the community partner, such as the board of directors, that they have reviewed and approved the agreements in this document and the minutes of the meeting at which the document was reviewed and approved. This really helps to have concrete documentation that, yes, the community is on board with this project and they are feeling comfortable moving forward. Next slide, please. So what does this mean for current climate awardees? The good news is that since this document is a living document, there are many ways in which you can still engage with it. So, you know, your projects have already been funded. Now is the time to have those conversations between the academic and community partners and reviewing any agreements that you have written up. And if they look good to both partners, there's, you know, accept it and keep moving and just determine how often you will revisit and revise. If you don't have a written document or a set of agreements, a memorandum of understanding, then now is the time to start this process together of creating one. And it could be that, as I mentioned, that you choose to revise or amend your current MOU and add additional details. Next slide, please. So for future projects that you all are involved in ideal circumstances, you know, these are some of the details that you put in place as you're developing your project. You create and document your memorandum of understanding. I appreciate your time and attention today. Next slide, please.
I hope all of you had a constructive and helpful discussion in the breakout room. I was in breakout room 1 and can certainly say that I think this was a good discussion that we were having. I hope you were all able to add to the Padlet. I'll just repost the link for everyone here in case someone else has more ideas that they would like to share with their fellow participants here and with UCRP, because we are keeping those ideas to inform further actions on our part. And having said that, I would like to invite the facilitators of the 4 breakout rooms to report out to the bigger group. And let's start with room number 1. That was Dr. Steve Allison.
Thank you, Maggie. Yeah, we had a great conversation about, you know, relating back to our previous workshop on funding needs and funding process. You know, that's a lot of what's important for these agreements, community agreements or MOUs, is really figuring out how the resources are going to flow, in addition to, you know, how the ideas are going to flow. And one of the good suggestions, I think, was that, you know, our group is viewing these MOUs as a longer term commitment. In some cases, they're already in place, or something, you know, like them is already in place. Maybe this grant or other grants provide the prompt to develop a longer term MOU. You know, we recognize that these take time, right? They have to be co-developed, they have to be approved by all the parties. Maybe there's like contracts and lawyers involved. So, you know, these things take time, and you want to be investing in that relationship long term. And then specific projects or specific scopes of work or specific funding mechanisms might then fall under that MOU, and that MOU provides the broader guidance and the broader structure and point of trust and contact to really facilitate and support those, more short-term or local scale projects and scopes of work. So I think that was the main gist of our conversation. If anyone wants to add, feel free.
Thank you. I'll let the 4 facilitators report out, and then we will open it up for more questions and more additional comments. So Dr. Jose Marin, please, for room number 2.
So Jose had to run, but
Okay.
so I can report out for group number
Okay,
2.
great.
Yeah, and if I miss anything major, please, somebody else from our group, I'd ask you to chime in. But anyway, just in terms of what MOUs are helpful for, roles and defining those roles and responsibilities, defining preferred modes of communication, especially thinking about different cultural norms that could exist between groups. And it's a good way to make sure you're hearing from everyone, not having, say, academics dominate the conversation. And they're a good time saver for issues that come up frequently. And then some specific advice that the group had. One was, just it being important to really define roles and compensation for different groups and people. And related to the communication modes, agree on preferred languages for communicating back to communities. And then also think about it as a living document, not something that's set in stone just because it's been signed and feels very formal, but it's something that could be revisited in the future as the collaboration develops. And then things that people wish they had included. There were a couple points around resolving disagreements, agreeing on if there's an organization or a resource specifically that would be used if disagreements come up during the project. And it was highlighted that there are some useful resources for that, and data sharing agreements that especially that communities may have data that they don't want shared in certain ways. So that's something they wish they'd included in their MOUs.
Right, thank you, Nick. Room number 3, Dr. Miriam Greenberg.
Thank you. This is super helpful. I really appreciated the other comments as well. And I wanted to thank Sen for helping with our use of this Padlet. So we were talking about the ways in which MOUs can be helpful for really getting the conversation started. People may develop relationships with their partners in a number of ways and may include them in proposals and, have had prior communication with the organizations in order to figure out, the role they're going to play on the proposal and in the budget justification. But, it's really good to revisit that and to really start from a solid foundation in terms of what the plan is moving forward for the next 2 years. I like the idea, by the way, of also seeing this as potentially something part of a longer term relationship. We really focused on the 2 years of the grant, but that's something that I think is also useful to keep in mind, also for those of us who've had longer term relationships and it's changing as a result of this grant in some manner. So so we thought of this as, the kind of the conversation around the MOU is in some ways as important as the MOU itself. And in terms of some of the reasons why it can be so helpful as well, is that it sets the institutional memory piece when there's turnover in an organization or amongst ourselves, and the group administering the grant may shift over time. We thought it was also helpful because it set kind of goalposts. And this relates also to some advice, while also trying to keep it, in some cases, broad and not too specific, so as to allow for some flexibility. We also, similar to the previous group, thought of this as, I like the language of a living document. Thinking about, for instance, some advice was to maybe have an MOU for year 1 and year 2, and to kind of revisit the MOU. We're planning on doing that with our partners in the fall of 2024 to see how did it work out. Are we doing what we thought we were going to be able to do? Do we need to revise? I think another key point is the idea of co-authorship. I'm hearing that from other groups, the idea that this is something that you're really collaborating on. Some concern that was raised had to do with the potential for there to be a sense of like a power dynamic in the drafting of the MOU between the university and the organization. Sometimes that might have to do with the kind of legalistic language of it. Some of that may vary by organization. Some of our partners we would not be able to have a relationship with if it weren't for an MOU, and others have never done an MOU. So there's a range of capacity and experience with these documents. So we thought, kind of considering that and having a conversation with organizations could be useful along those lines. And I think I'll leave it there.
Thank you so much. Thank you. And Zoom room number 4, that's Dr. Matt Spark.
Hey, thanks, Maggie. And also thanks to Layla, who helped take notes in the Padlet for our group. And what we talked about pretty much resonates with what you've all summarized already. So I don't want to belabor this too much. The one, well, it's a couple of additional things that came out of our conversation that complement what's been said before. The one is that we talked about, and this is kind of basically a conversation between me and Elizabeth Grassi from the Strategic Growth Council. We talked about the actual sort of budget specificities and how they relate to the MOU, and I shared out from UCSC's our experience, which is also where Miriam is. And so you're having 2 slugs in a row here. The experience that the MOU is more the big picture map of the collaborative relationship that's jointly sort of evolved together and co-written with the partners in the community. And the scope of work is a more narrow document that serves a more budget sort of specific function. And thanks to Evan, who's from our Institute of Social Transformation at UCSC, who's also on this meeting today, I came to see the scope of work as playing this more instrumental role for, partly to satisfy the requirements of our budget office. And that in turn will allow the MOU to evolve into the future more as this sort of roadmap, as Elizabeth put it, for where the sort of pathways for collaboration can go in the future. So I'm hoping that the MOUs will remain open documents that I'm working on. And that was something we talked about. Another part of the openness, and this is another thing that Catalina in our group shared out, is that there are opportunities for discussing specifics in the MOU, such as student involvement in the community-based organizations. And there's space there for also talking about what were ideals for that student engagement and internship work, and sort of protecting against the dangers of sort of more parachuted in student experiences that are not very well supported from the university end. So the MOU could correct against that. Layla, am I missing out anything else important that we discussed, or is that about it?
That sounds right. I think you're right that it has been covered. A lot of the things have been covered by the groups already.
All right.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Okay, thank you, everyone. We are almost at time. I will leave a minute for Sen for some last words. But before I do that, I would again like to thank you. I'm excited to see that there are ideas and issues that do benefit from this thought exchange and helping each other. And we will be putting more resources on our website, as I mentioned, in the smaller group as well. And just to give you a teaser, as Sen was saying, the next workshop on the history of communities doing their own research and around those themes will be on Monday, March the 25th in the afternoon. And Sen, I'll give it over to you for last words.
Great. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining. I know it's 11 and people will need to hop off, so I'll keep it short. Our plan is to learn from what we heard in the breakout rooms and create a document that we can share on the website. Just as Maggie was mentioning, we want to come out with something concrete and useful from the conversations. We also hope that the 30 minutes was a good amount of time to get into discussion and surface the important themes for the group. Thank you so much, and we look forward to seeing you again in March.